Billionaire ashamed of his wife's color, and instead took his mistress to his business partner's wedding, his wife walked in with their children and shattered his world. The crystal champagne flute exploded against the marble floor, but Daniel Jenkins barely registered the sound over the roar of blood in his ears. His phone screen glowed with 3 words that turned his world to ash. "We're here, Daddy." Daniel's hands trembled as he stared at the photo attached to the message. Simone, radiant in emerald silk that made her dark skin glow like burnished gold, stood beside their black sedan. In her arms, 5-year-old Luna beamed in a miniature princess dress, while 7-year-old Christian stood proud in his tiny tuxedo, both children's faces bright with excitement at seeing their daddy's important friends. Hey beautiful souls, welcome back to a story that's about to shatter every assumption you've ever made about love, loyalty, and the devastating price of living a lie. Before we dive into this emotional roller coaster, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from tonight. Are you ready to have your heart broken and rebuilt? If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do it now, because what you're about to witness will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family, shame, and redemption. The Hamptons Country Club buzzed with Manhattan's elite, celebrating the wedding of Thomas Wilson, heir to the banking dynasty that could make or break Daniel's empire. 400 of the most powerful people in America filled the ballroom, their collective wealth measuring in the hundreds of billions. And threading through them like a perfectly polished snake was Vivian Fairfax, platinum blonde, blue-blooded, and utterly fake. The woman every board member, investor, and society matron believed was Daniel's girlfriend. The woman who had no idea that the bachelor millionaire she'd been dating for 2 years was actually a married father of 2. "Darling, you look absolutely devastated." Vivian's manicured hand slipped around his arm, her voice dripping with practiced concern. "The toast isn't for another hour. Surely you're not nervous about speaking to a few hundred people." Daniel's throat constricted. The toast. He was supposed to honor his biggest client while introducing the special woman in his life to the Wilson patriarch. Everyone expected that woman to be Vivian. But Simone was coming. His real wife, the brilliant woman he'd married in secret 6 years ago, was about to destroy the carefully constructed lie that had built his fortune. She was bringing their children to meet the people their father considered more important than his own family. His phone buzzed again. Another photo. Simone's hand on the country club's front door, her wedding ring catching the afternoon light like an accusation. In 60 seconds, maybe less, his wife would walk into this ballroom. His children would see him with another woman. His board of directors would discover that their focused bachelor CEO had been hiding a family for 6 years. And Daniel Jenkins, the man who had built an empire on calculated risks and perfect control, was about to lose everything he'd worked for, including everything that actually mattered. The doors to the ballroom opened with a whisper that sounded like thunder. Through them walked the most beautiful woman Daniel had ever seen, holding the hands of the 2 most precious people in his world. Simone moved with the grace of a queen, her head held high, completely unaware that she was about to detonate a bomb in the center of New York's highest society. Behind her, little voices echoed across the suddenly silent ballroom. "Mama, is that where Daddy works? When do we get to hug him?" Daniel's champagne glass wasn't the only thing about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. 6 years ago, Daniel Jenkins had believed love could conquer anything. Fresh out of Harvard Business School, inheriting his father's modest construction company, he'd met Simone Washington at a business conference in Chicago. She was presenting her revolutionary urban development strategies to a room full of skeptical old money, commanding their attention with brilliance that left him breathless. Their first conversation lasted 4 hours. Their first date lasted 3 days. Within 6 months, he'd proposed with a ring he couldn't afford, and she'd said yes with tears streaming down her face. Back then, Daniel had been proud to introduce her as his fiancée. He'd brought her to company parties, board meetings, family dinners. His father, Anthony Corleone, had welcomed Simone like the daughter he'd never had, praising her mind and her kindness in equal measure. But Anthony died of a heart attack 3 weeks before their wedding, leaving Daniel a company drowning in debt and a board of directors who viewed his young, inexperienced leadership with open skepticism. Suddenly, every decision mattered. Every relationship was scrutinized. Every perceived weakness could destroy everything his father had built. The first comment came from board member Harrison Wells during a particularly brutal quarterly meeting. Perhaps if you weren't so distracted by personal matters, you'd notice our market share bleeding to competitors. His eyes had lingered meaningfully on the wedding photo Daniel kept on his desk. The second came from potential investor Catherine Pierce. The Wilson family values stability, Daniel. They prefer working with focused leaders who understand priorities. The third was from his mentor, Judge Richards, who'd pulled him aside after a disastrous pitch meeting. Son, you're brilliant, but this business requires sacrifice. The old families, they have certain expectations about who belongs in their world. Daniel had understood the subtext perfectly. His wife's intelligence, her MBA from Northwestern, her innovative ideas. None of it mattered to people who measured worth by bloodlines and social connections. To them, Simone would always be the wrong color, from the wrong background, with the wrong pedigree. So, he'd made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Gradually, quietly, he'd begun leaving Simone out of business events. Just tonight, baby. This one's all old corporate guys. Then it became a pattern. Then it became a lie he told so often he almost believed it himself. The irony was devastating. The harder Daniel worked to hide his family, the more successful he became. Without the distraction of a wife and children, investors saw him as completely dedicated to business. Board members praised his focus. The Wilson account, worth $50 million annually, came to him specifically because Thomas Wilson III believed he was hiring a bachelor with no competing loyalties. Vivian Fairfax had entered his life 2 years ago at a charity gala, introduced by Catherine Pierce as someone who understands our world. Blonde, polished, connected to every important family on the East Coast, she was everything his wife wasn't in the eyes of high society. What had started as a business arrangement, someone to accompany him to events where a +1 was expected, had gradually become something more complicated. Vivian believed they were dating. His board believed they were the perfect couple. Society photographers captured them at galas and premieres, creating a false narrative that Daniel had become too cowardly to correct. Meanwhile, at home in their modest Brooklyn townhouse, Simone had built her own consulting empire. Washington Development Strategies now employed 40 people and had transformed neighborhoods across 3 states. She'd done it while raising their twins alone most evenings, while attending school plays by herself, while explaining to confused children why Daddy couldn't come to their birthday parties, but could make time for strangers at fancy hotels. She'd never complained, never demanded explanations for his increasing absences, never questioned why business trips seemed to coincide with every important family milestone. But Daniel saw the pain in her eyes when he missed Luna's first dance recital for a board dinner. He felt the distance growing when he couldn't attend Christian's school presentation because he was photographed at a charity auction with Vivian. He watched his wife slowly stop expecting him to show up, stop saving him seats at school events, stop mentioning his name when other parents asked about her husband. 3 months ago, everything had changed. Thomas Wilson III had specifically requested to meet Daniel's family at his wedding. "I've heard wonderful things about your wife," he'd said during a golf meeting. "My grandfather insists on meeting the spouses of our major partners. Family values, you understand." Daniel had panicked. He'd told Thomas that Simone was traveling, that she might not make it to the wedding. But Wilson had been insistent. "She'll be our guest of honor. I've actually looked into her work, remarkable woman. The family patriarch is quite excited to discuss urban development strategies with her." That's when Daniel had realized the full scope of his predicament. The Wilsons knew about Simone. They'd investigated her, admired her work, expected to meet her. But they had no idea she was married to the man who'd been bringing another woman to every social event for 2 years. Now, as Simone walked into the ballroom with their children, Daniel felt the weight of 6 years of choices crushing down on him. Every lie he'd told, every time he'd chosen image over integrity, every moment he'd prioritized other people's approval over his family's dignity. It was all about to be exposed in front of 400 of the most powerful people in America. And the most terrifying part wasn't the potential destruction of his career. It was the realization that his children, his beautiful, innocent children, were about to learn that their father was ashamed of them. "Daddy," Luna's voice rang across the ballroom like a bell, pure and joyful and devastating. She broke away from Simone's protective grip and ran straight toward Daniel, her princess dress flowing behind her like liquid starlight. Every conversation in the room stopped mid-sentence. 400 pairs of eyes turned to watch a 5-year-old girl throw herself into the arms of Manhattan's most eligible bachelor. Daniel's world exploded into slow motion. He saw board member Harrison Wells's champagne glass freeze halfway to his lips. He watched investor Catherine Pierce's face drain of color as understanding dawned. He felt Vivian's manicured nails dig into his arm hard enough to draw blood. But Luna was in his arms now, her small hands cupping his face with the fearless love only children possessed. "Daddy, you look so handsome. Mama said we get to meet all your important friends tonight." The word "daddy" echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Christian followed his sister with more caution, his 7-year-old instincts already picking up on the tension crackling through the air. But when he reached Daniel, he still wrapped his arms around his father's legs with desperate affection. "We missed you, Daddy. Mama said you've been working really, really hard." Thomas Wilson III stepped forward, his silver eyebrows raised in fascination rather than shock. "Daniel, I believe introductions are in order." Daniel's throat closed completely. Words died before they could form. 6 years of carefully constructed lies crumbled around him as he stood frozen in the center of New York's elite, holding his daughter while his son clung to his legs. Simone approached with the grace of a queen walking to her execution. She'd dressed for battle tonight, emerald silk that made her skin glow, her natural hair styled in an elaborate crown of braids, diamonds at her throat that caught the ballroom's crystal lighting. She looked magnificent and terrifying and completely unashamed. "Hello, Thomas." Her voice carried clearly through the deadly silence. "I'm Simone Washington Jenkins. I've heard wonderful things about Wilson Banking's community development initiatives." Thomas's smile was genuine, warm, completely unaware of the catastrophe unfolding. "Mrs. Jenkins, the pleasure is mine. I've been following your work with Washington Development Strategies. Your Brooklyn revitalization project was extraordinary. You're too kind. And please, congratulations on your wedding. Your bride looked absolutely radiant during the ceremony." Daniel watched in horror and fascination as his wife effortlessly charmed the room's most powerful man. But he could see the pain beneath her performance, the hurt she was hiding behind professional courtesy. She dressed like royalty not for the society that had rejected her, but to show her children what dignity looked like in the face of betrayal. "And these must be your children," Thomas continued, kneeling to Christian's level. "What handsome young people." "I'm Christian Anthony Jenkins," his son announced with 7-year-old formality. "This is my sister Luna Marie. We're named after our great-grandfather and our mama's grandmama." Thomas's eyes sparkled with delight. "Strong family names. I can tell you're both very proud of your heritage." "We are," Luna chimed in, still secure in Daniel's arms. "Mama teaches us about being proud of who we are. She says Daddy is proud of us too, but he's too busy with work to show us off." The innocent words landed like physical blows. Daniel felt every eye in the room dissecting that statement, understanding its implications. His daughter had just revealed that their father kept them hidden, that they existed in the shadows of his professional life. Vivian's voice cut through the tension like broken glass. "Daniel, I don't understand. Who are these people?" The question hung in the air like a noose. Every board member, every investor, every society matron waited for his response. This was the moment of truth, the choice that would define everything that came after. But Daniel couldn't speak. The same cowardice that had ruled his life for 6 years paralyzed him now, even as his wife and children watched him fail the most important test of his life. Simone's expression didn't change, but something died behind her eyes. The last flicker of hope she'd carried, the belief that love might finally overcome fear, crumbled into dust. "Children," she said softly, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "Come here, please. We need to let Daddy visit with his friends." "But Mama," Christian protested, his child's instincts sensing wrongness even if he couldn't identify it. "Daddy hasn't introduced us to his friends yet. You said he would be excited to show us off." Simone knelt gracefully, her dress pooling around her like dark water. She took Christian's hands in hers, her voice gentle but firm. Sometimes people aren't ready to love out loud, baby. That doesn't mean the love isn't real. It just means they're scared. The words were spoken to her son, but they landed like arrows in Daniel's chest. In front of 400 witnesses, his wife was teaching their children grace in the face of abandonment, dignity in the moment of betrayal. Harrison Wells stepped forward, his face a mask of corporate concern. "Daniel, perhaps we could speak privately?" But before Daniel could respond, Thomas Wilson III raised his hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of old money and older power. "Actually, I think this is exactly the conversation that needs to happen publicly." His eyes moved between Daniel and Simone with calculating precision. "You see, my family has built our reputation on integrity, authenticity, and family values. We don't do business with men who live double lives." The threat was crystal clear. The Wilson account, $50 million annually, hung in the balance. But it was Luna who delivered the killing blow, her 5-year-old voice pure and devastating in its innocence. "Daddy, who is this pretty lady? Why is she holding your hand instead of Mama?" 400 people turned to stare at Vivian Fairfax, seeing her for the first time not as Daniel's girlfriend, but as the other woman in a married man's life. The society matrons who had welcomed her, the board members who had approved of her, the investors who had seen her as evidence of Daniel's good judgment. They all understood the truth in that moment. Daniel Jenkins, the man they'd trusted with their money and their respect, had been living a lie for 6 years. He'd hidden his wife and children while parading around with a mistress, making a mockery of everything they claimed to value. And now, with his empire crumbling around him and his family watching him fail, Daniel had to choose: his reputation or his soul. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Daniel stood frozen in the eye of a hurricane, feeling the weight of 400 stares pressing down on him like physical blows. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, the words he needed trapped behind years of practiced deception. He started, his voice cracking like a teenager's. Thomas Wilson stepped closer, his silver eyes sharp with disappointment. "Mr. Jenkins, my family has built our empire on trust. When we partner with someone, we're not just investing in their business, we're investing in their character." Harrison Wells moved in from the left, his face a mask of corporate damage control. "Daniel, perhaps we should table this discussion for a more appropriate time." "No." Thomas's voice cut through the suggestion like a blade. "I think this is exactly the right time. Mrs. Jenkins, I'm curious. How long have you and your husband been married?" Simone's chin lifted with quiet dignity. 6 years this October. We met at the Chicago Business Innovation Conference." 6 years, Thomas repeated, loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "And in all that time, Daniel, you never thought to mention your wife and children to your business partners?" Daniel felt sweat beating on his forehead despite the ballroom's perfect climate control. Every board member was calculating the implications. Every investor was reassessing his trustworthiness. Every society matron was whispering behind jeweled hands. "It's complicated," he finally managed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Complicated?" Catherine Pierce stepped forward, her voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. "You've brought this woman," she gestured dismissively at Vivian, "to every major social event for 2 years. You've introduced her as your companion to our most important clients. What exactly is complicated about honesty?" Vivian's face had gone pale beneath her perfectly applied makeup. "Daniel, you told me you were divorced. You said your ex-wife lived in California with the children from your previous relationship." The lie hung in the air like poison gas. Daniel watched his wife's face as she absorbed the depth of his betrayal, not just hidden, but actively misrepresented. Not just absent from his professional life, but erased from it completely. "Mama," Christian tugged on Simone's dress, his 7-year-old voice small and confused. "Why is everyone talking about Daddy like he doesn't live with us?" Simone knelt beside her son, her composure never wavering even as her world collapsed around her. "Sometimes grown-ups make choices that are hard to understand, baby. What matters is that you and Luna know how much you're loved. But Daddy does love us, right?" Luna's question pierced the ballroom's tension like a knife. She was still in Daniel's arms, her small hands on his face, searching his eyes for reassurance. "You're not ashamed of us, are you, Daddy?" The question that had haunted Daniel for 6 years was now being asked by his 5-year-old daughter in front of the most powerful people in New York. Every choice he'd made, every lie he'd told, every time he'd chosen image over integrity, it all led to this moment. Judge Richards, Daniel's longtime mentor, stepped forward with the careful precision of a man who'd spent decades weighing evidence. "Son, I've known you since you were Christian's age. Your father would be devastated to see what you've become." The mention of Anthony Jenkins hit like a physical blow. Daniel's father had built his construction company on handshake deals and ironclad integrity. He'd taught Daniel that a man's word was his bond, that family came before profit, that character mattered more than cash flow. "Don't you dare bring my father into this." Daniel's voice finally found strength, but it was the wrong kind, defensive rather than decisive. "Your father would have been proud to introduce these beautiful children to anyone who mattered," Judge Richards continued relentlessly. "He would have celebrated this remarkable woman's achievements instead of hiding them like a guilty secret." Simone rose slowly from comforting Christian, her emerald dress catching the light as she moved with lethal grace toward the cluster of power brokers surrounding her husband. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd built an empire while raising 2 children and supporting a coward. "Gentlemen, ladies," she addressed the room with calm professionalism. "I didn't come here to cause a scene or embarrass anyone. I came because my children asked to meet their father's colleagues, and I believe children should see their parents in all aspects of their lives." Her eyes found Daniel's across the circle of stunned faces. "I built Washington development strategies from our kitchen table while my husband was establishing Jenkins Construction's reputation. I've supported his career, celebrated his successes, and raised our children to be proud of the family name they carry." She paused, letting the implications sink in. Every person in that ballroom could see what Daniel had thrown away. Not just a wife, but a partner who'd supported his rise while building her own empire. "What I won't do," Simone continued, "is allow my children to believe that love comes with conditions, that they should hide who they are to make other people comfortable, or that success requires sacrificing the people who matter most." Thomas Wilson III began to applaud, slowly at first, then with gathering intensity. One by one, other guests joined in until the entire ballroom was clapping for the woman who'd just delivered a masterclass in dignity under fire. But the applause felt like a funeral dirge to Daniel. He understood what was happening. The room was choosing sides, and they weren't choosing his. Vivian's voice cut through the applause like broken glass. "I'm not staying for this humiliation." She grabbed her purse from their table, her face flushed with embarrassment and rage. "Daniel, when you're ready to explain how you've made a fool of me for 2 years, you know my number." She stalked toward the exit, her designer heels clicking against marble like gunshots. But she paused at the ballroom's entrance, turning back with venomous precision. "Oh, and Simone, you're welcome to him. Though I'd be careful. If he'll lie to his business partners about having a family, what else is he hiding from you?" The poison arrow found its target. Daniel saw doubt flicker across Simone's features for the first time that evening. In destroying his relationship with Vivian, he'd also planted seeds of distrust in his marriage. Christian tugged on Daniel's tuxedo jacket, his small face scrunched with worry. "Daddy, why did the blonde lady seem mad at you? Did you do something wrong?" Out of the mouths of babes. Daniel looked down at his son, his brilliant, innocent son who could cut through adult complications with childlike clarity, and felt the last of his defenses crumble. "Yes, buddy," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Daddy did something very wrong." Thomas Wilson checked his watch with deliberate precision. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe it's time for the toasts. Daniel, you're still scheduled to speak, assuming you have something authentic to say." The challenge was unmistakable. Daniel could take the microphone and try to salvage his reputation with lies and damage control, or he could finally tell the truth and accept the consequences. But as he looked at his children, Luna still in his arms, Christian clinging to his leg, Daniel realized the most terrifying thing of all. He might be too late to save what mattered most. The microphone felt like a weapon in Daniel's trembling hands as he stepped onto the small stage at the front of the ballroom. 400 faces stared up at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust to barely concealed anticipation for his downfall. Behind him, The wedding photographer's camera clicked like a countdown timer. Every moment of his humiliation was being documented for posterity, for tomorrow's society pages, for the business journals that would dissect his spectacular fall from grace. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel began, his voice echoing through the sound system. "I was asked to toast Thomas and Elizabeth Wilson on their wedding day, but I find myself in need of making a different kind of speech entirely." He found Simone in the crowd, standing near the back with their children. Christian had wrapped his arms around his mother's waist, sensing the tension even if he couldn't understand it. Luna had moved to stand beside them, her princess dress wrinkled now, her earlier excitement dimmed by the strange adult drama unfolding around her. 6 years ago, I made a choice that I told myself was about business success. I convinced myself that keeping my family private was protecting them, that what happened in boardrooms and country clubs didn't affect what happened at home. His voice gained strength as he continued, the words flowing like poison being drained from a wound. I was wrong. Spectacularly, devastatingly wrong. Thomas Wilson III watched from his bride's side, his expression unreadable. The other guests had fallen silent, recognizing that they were witnessing either a career resurrection or a professional suicide. "The truth is, I've been living 2 lives. In this world, your world, I've been the focused bachelor, the dedicated businessman with no distractions. But at home in Brooklyn, I'm a husband and father to the most extraordinary people I've ever known." Daniel's eyes found Harrison Wells, whose face had gone pale with realization. The board member who'd questioned Daniel's focus all those years ago was understanding the true scope of his deception. "My wife, Simone Washington Jenkins, built her consulting empire while I was building mine. She's revolutionized urban development across 3 states, employed dozens of people, and transformed communities that the rest of us had written off. She did all of this while raising our children primarily alone, because their father was too much of a coward to claim them publicly." The confession hung in the air like a physical presence. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, recognizing their own complicity in the system that had made Daniel's choices seem logical. "But here's what I didn't understand until this moment," Daniel continued, his voice breaking slightly. "In hiding my family to protect my reputation, I taught my children that they were something to be ashamed of. I taught my wife that her love wasn't worth defending. And I taught myself that success built on lies was somehow more valuable than authenticity built on truth." Judge Richards stepped forward slightly, his expression a mixture of disappointment and something that might have been pride. His protégé was finally finding his moral center, even if it was too late to matter. "Thomas, you asked me to introduce the special woman in my life," Daniel said, addressing the groom directly. "That woman is standing in the back of this room, wearing emerald silk and dignity that I don't deserve. She's holding the hands of 2 children who call me daddy despite the fact that I've failed them in every way that matters." The ballroom had become a church, silent and reverent in the face of complete confession. Even the wedding service providers had stopped moving, transfixed by the destruction and potential redemption playing out on stage. "I know what you're all thinking," Daniel continued. "You're wondering how you can trust a man who's lied about something so fundamental. You're calculating the risk of doing business with someone who's built his professional life on deception." He paused, meeting the eyes of every board member, every investor, every client who had believed in him. "You're right to question that trust. I've violated every principle my father taught me about integrity in business and life. The Jenkins name used to mean something in this city: honesty, reliability, family first. I've dishonored that legacy in ways that would break my father's heart." Catherine Pierce exchanged glances with other board members, their faces calculating the damage to the company's reputation, the potential lawsuits, the inevitable media fallout. But Daniel wasn't finished. He turned to face Simone directly, speaking to her across the crowded room as if they were alone in their kitchen on a quiet Sunday morning. "Simone, I know I've lost the right to ask for your forgiveness. I know that saying sorry can't undo 6 years of choosing fear over love. But I need you to know that every success I've achieved means nothing compared to what I've thrown away." Tears were streaming down his face now, 6 years of suppressed guilt and shame pouring out in front of the people whose approval he'd valued more than his family's dignity. "I hid you because I was afraid these people would reject me if they knew who I really was. What I didn't understand is that in hiding you, I rejected myself. I rejected everything good and real and worthy in my life. Simone's face was unreadable, but Daniel saw her hand tighten on Christian's shoulder. Their son was looking back and forth between his parents, his 7-year-old mind trying to process why Daddy was crying, why the room felt so heavy with adult emotions he couldn't name. To everyone in this room, Daniel said, turning back to the crowd, I resign from the board of Jenkins Construction effective immediately. I'll liquidate my assets to pay back any investor who wants out, and I'll face whatever legal consequences come from my deception. Harrison Wells stepped forward, panic replacing calculation on his face. Daniel, you don't need to make rash decisions. We can work through this privately. No. Daniel's voice was firm for the first time all evening. Privacy is what got us here. Transparency is the only way forward. He set the microphone down carefully and stepped off the stage, moving through the crowd toward his family. People parted before him like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of shock, admiration, and pity. When he reached Simone, he dropped to his knees in front of their children, his expensive tuxedo pooling on the marble floor. Christian, Luna, he said softly, his voice meant only for them. Daddy made some very big mistakes. I let fear make me ashamed of the most beautiful parts of my life, you and your mama. That was wrong, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to fix it. Luna reached out to touch his face, her small fingers gentle on his tear-stained cheeks. Are you sad, Daddy? Yes, baby girl. But I'm also hopeful, because now everyone knows the truth about how lucky I am to be your daddy. The ballroom had erupted in whispered conversations, but Daniel no longer cared what they were saying. For the first time in 6 years, he was exactly where he belonged, on his knees before his family, finally ready to fight for what mattered most. But Simone's face remained unreadable, and Daniel realized that his public confession, while necessary, might not be enough to repair the private damage he'd done to the people who loved him most. Simone's silence stretched for an eternity before she finally spoke, her voice steady and devastating in its calm. Children, we're going home. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. She wasn't screaming, wasn't crying, wasn't even angry. The emotion he saw in her eyes was something far worse than rage. It was the cold resignation of someone who had finally stopped hoping. Mama, is Daddy coming with us? Luna asked, her small hand still touching Daniel's face. He seems really sad. Not tonight, sweetheart. Simone's voice was gentle with their daughter, but arctic when her eyes met Daniel's. Daddy has things to figure out. Daniel struggled to his feet, his legs shaky from kneeling on marble and the adrenaline crash following his confession. Simone, please. Can we talk privately? We had 6 years to talk privately, Daniel. Tonight you chose to have this conversation in front of 400 strangers. She lifted Luna into her arms while Christian pressed close to her side. I won't keep the children up any later. Around them, the ballroom buzzed with whispered conversations and the rustle of expensive fabric as guests processed what they'd witnessed. Some looked sympathetic, others disgusted, but most simply looked uncomfortable, as if Daniel's emotional breakdown had violated some unspoken rule of high society behavior. Thomas Wilson III approached with careful steps, his bride's hand tucked in his arm. Mrs. Jenkins, before you go, I wanted to say something. Simone turned, her posture radiating dignity despite the chaos swirling around her. Of course. My grandfather built our family's reputation on the principle that character matters more than connections. Your grace under pressure tonight has shown more character than most people display in a lifetime. Thomas paused, choosing his words carefully. I'd very much like to discuss some business opportunities with you. Your consulting firm's work speaks for itself. The offer hung in the air like a lifeline, but also like a dagger. The Wilsons were willing to work with Simone, just not with her husband. I appreciate that, Thomas. Perhaps we can speak next week. Simone's professionalism never wavered, even as her personal world collapsed around her. Harrison Wells stepped forward, his face flushed with panic and wine. Daniel, you can't just resign. Think about the employees, the contracts, the shareholders. You can't destroy everything your father built because of one moment of honesty. Daniel's voice cut through Wells's protest. Because I finally told the truth about who I am. Because you've lost your mind. Wells hissed, glancing around to make sure other guests weren't listening. You can smooth this over. Apologize to the right people, make some charitable donations, let the media cycle move on. But resigning? Liquidating assets? You're destroying everything over a domestic situation that could have been handled quietly. The phrase domestic situation made Daniel's hands clench into fists. 6 years of marriage, 2 children, a brilliant woman who'd built her own empire while supporting his. Reduced to a domestic situation by a man who'd never valued anything that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. Harrison, you're fired. Wells's face went white. You can't fire me. I own shares, I have contracts. Sue me. Add it to the list of legal problems I'll be dealing with. Daniel turned away from his former board member, no longer caring about corporate protocols or shareholder agreements. But when he looked for his family, they were gone. Panic seized his chest as he scanned the ballroom. Through the French doors leading to the garden, he caught a glimpse of emerald silk disappearing into the night. Daniel ran. He burst through the doors onto the country club's manicured terrace, his dress shoes slipping on the stone steps as he chased the retreating figure of his wife. The valet was already bringing their car around, and Christian was climbing into the back seat while Simone buckled Luna into her car seat. "Simone, wait!" Daniel called out, his voice echoing across the parking area. She straightened slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. When she turned to face him, the distance between them felt like a chasm. "What do you want me to say, Daniel?" Her voice carried 6 years of exhaustion. "That I'm proud of you for finally telling the truth? That I forgive you for teaching our children that there's something to be ashamed of? That I understand why you've spent 2 years playing house with another woman while I raised your children alone." Each word was precisely aimed, finding its target with surgical accuracy. Daniel felt his chest tighten as the full scope of his betrayal was laid bare between them. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he started, but Simone held up a hand to stop him. "You're right. You don't." She looked back at their children through the car window. Luna had fallen asleep against Christian's shoulder, exhausted by the evening's emotional chaos. "But this isn't about what you deserve anymore, Daniel. It's about what they deserve. They deserve their father. They deserve a father who's proud of them, who doesn't hide them like guilty secrets, who doesn't teach them that love is conditional on how well you fit into other people's expectations." Simone's voice broke slightly on the last words, the first crack in her composure all evening. "I can change. I just proved that in there. You proved that public humiliation can force you to make a speech." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But where were you last month when Luna asked why her daddy never came to school like other daddies? Where were you when Christian stopped talking about you to his friends because they didn't believe you existed?" The accusations hit like physical blows. Daniel had been so focused on protecting his image that he'd never considered how his absence affected his children's daily lives, their social development, their understanding of their own worth. "I didn't know they were struggling. Because you weren't there to see it." The words exploded out of Simone with 6 years of suppressed frustration. "You've been living in 2 separate worlds, Daniel, and you made sure the one that included us was invisible to everyone who mattered to you." Behind them, guests were beginning to trickle out of the ballroom. Their evening of celebration turned into unexpected drama. Daniel could feel their eyes on his back, could hear the whispered conversations that would fuel society gossip for months. "So what happens now?" he asked quietly. Simone wiped her eyes carefully, preserving what was left of her makeup. "Now you go back to your empty penthouse and figure out who you are when nobody's watching. The children and I will go home to Brooklyn and continue building the life we've had all along, the one without you in it." "Simone, please." "I'm done, Daniel." The finality in her voice was absolute. "I'm done hoping you'll choose us. I'm done making excuses for why Daddy can't come to dance recitals or birthday parties. I'm done pretending that love is enough when it comes with shame attached." She moved toward the car door, then paused without turning around. "The children can see you on weekends if you want. Supervised visits until you prove you won't disappear on them again." Supervised visits. Like he was a danger to his own children. Like 6 years of marriage and fatherhood could be reduced to court-mandated meetings in neutral locations. "What about us?" The question came out strangled, desperate. "There is no us anymore." Simone's voice was steady again, professional. "There hasn't been for a long time. Tonight just made it official." She got into the car without looking back. Through the window, Daniel could see Christian watching him with confused 7-year-old eyes, trying to understand why Daddy looked so sad, why Mama was crying, why their family felt like it was breaking apart. The car pulled away slowly, carrying his children into a future where their father was a weekend visitor rather than a daily presence. Daniel stood alone in the country club parking lot, surrounded by the luxury cars of people who no longer respected him, watching his family disappear into the darkness. Behind him, the ballroom lights flickered and dimmed as the wedding reception wound down. Inside, business cards were being exchanged, deals were being discussed, and his professional execution was being planned with the cold efficiency of corporate warfare. Daniel Jenkins had finally told the truth, but the truth had cost him everything he'd ever loved. His empire was crumbling, his reputation was destroyed, and his family was gone. For the first time in 6 years, he was completely, utterly alone, with no one left to blame but the coward staring back at him in the reflection of a stranger's car window. 3 months later, Daniel sat in the sterile waiting room of Dr. Sarah Martinez's family therapy practice, his hands shaking as he gripped a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The supervised visitation center smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams, a place where failed parents came to rebuild relationships with children who barely remembered them. His empire had collapsed exactly as predicted. Jenkins Construction was in bankruptcy proceedings, the board had voted him out unanimously, and his penthouse was on the market to pay legal fees. The society pages had moved on to fresher scandals, but the business world had a longer memory. No one would hire the man who'd built his career on lies. The door opened, and Christian appeared first, taller somehow in just 3 months, his 7-year-old face more serious than any child should be. Luna followed, clinging to their court-appointed supervisor's hand, her princess dress replaced by practical jeans and a Superman t-shirt. "Daddy!" Luna's excitement was muted now, uncertain. She hugged him carefully, as if testing whether he was real or another disappointment waiting to happen. Christian held back, studying Daniel with eyes that looked too old for his face. "Mama says you moved to a small apartment. She says you're learning how to be different." "I am learning, buddy." Daniel knelt to Christian's level, his voice rough with disuse. 3 months of court battles and asset liquidation had left him hollowed out, but seeing his children sparked something he'd thought was dead. "I'm learning how to be the daddy you both deserve." The supervised visit lasted 2 hours. They played board games on scratch tables, read picture books with missing pages, and ate vending machine snacks that tasted like cardboard. But Daniel focused on every moment, memorizing his children's voices, their laughs, the way Luna still reached for his hand when she was tired. When the supervisor announced time was up, Christian lingered by Daniel's chair. "Daddy, are you going to disappear again?" The question hit like a punch to the chest. "No, buddy. Never again. Promise." Daniel looked into his son's eyes, so much like Simone's, intelligent and searching, and made the only vow that mattered. "I promise. Even if I can't live with you and Mama right now, I will always be your daddy. Always." After they left, Daniel walked 12 blocks to his studio apartment in Queens, a one-room space that cost less than he used to spend on wine in a single evening. The building was old but clean, filled with working families who had real problems and real priorities. His neighbor, Mrs. Gonzalez, was struggling with groceries as he climbed the stairs. Without thinking, Daniel took her bags. "Gracias, mijo. You're getting skinny. Come eat dinner with us tomorrow. My granddaughter makes the best arroz con pollo." It was the first genuine kindness Daniel had received since his world collapsed. Mrs. Gonzalez didn't know about his scandal, didn't care about his former wealth. She saw a neighbor who needed community, and she offered it without conditions. That night, Daniel called the one person who might still take his call. "Anthony Jenkins Construction, this is Maria." "Maria, it's Daniel. Is my father's old foreman still working there?" A pause. Maria Santos had been his father's secretary for 20 years, had watched Daniel grow up in the construction trailers during summer breaks. She knew exactly who he was and what he'd become. "Danny." Her voice softened with the name she'd called him as a child. "Mijo, what happened to you?" The question broke something inside him. "I forgot who I was supposed to be, Maria. I forgot everything Papa taught me about what matters. Your father, may he rest in peace, Always said you had his heart, but too much of your mother's ambition. Maria's voice carried 30 years of watching the Jenkins family's dreams and disappointments. Maybe it's time to remember which one matters more. Is Tony Rodriguez still the foreman? Yes, but the company's struggling since the bankruptcy. They might not survive the winter. Daniel made a decision that would have terrified the man he used to be. Ask Tony if he needs help. Tell him Anthony Jenkins' son is ready to get his hands dirty again. The next morning, Daniel showed up at the construction site in work boots he'd bought at a discount store, carrying his father's old hard hat that Maria had saved in her desk drawer. Tony Rodriguez looked at him with skepticism and something that might have been pity. You sure about this, college boy? This isn't running board meetings. This is real work. My father built this company swinging a hammer. Maybe it's time I learned how. The work was brutal. Daniel's soft hands blistered within hours, his back screamed from lifting materials, and his expensive education meant nothing when trying to read blueprints in the rain. But something shifted inside him with every aching day. He remembered his father's stories about building something meaningful with your own hands. He reconnected with workers whose names he'd never bothered to learn when he was busy playing executive. He started to understand what his father had meant when he said that honest work was its own reward. 3 weeks into his construction rehabilitation, Daniel's phone rang during lunch break. The number was familiar but unexpected. Mr. Jenkins? This is Thomas Wilson III. Daniel nearly dropped his sandwich. Thomas. I didn't expect to hear from you. I imagine not. I'm calling because I've been thinking about what happened at my wedding. Specifically, about the courage it took to tell the truth when lies would have been easier. I'm not sure I'd call it courage. More like desperation. Thomas's laugh was genuine. Perhaps. But I've been in business long enough to know the difference between a man who's temporarily desperate and a man who's fundamentally changed. My family has a construction project in the Bronx, affordable housing for working families. We need someone who understands both the business side and the actual work. The offer hung in the air like a lifeline. Thomas, I appreciate this, but my company is in bankruptcy. I can't take on major contracts. I'm not offering to work with Jenkins Construction. I'm offering to work with you. Start fresh, build something new. Something that honors both your father's legacy and the man you're becoming. That evening, Daniel called Dr. Martinez. I want to schedule additional sessions. Not just for supervised visits. I want to learn how to be a better father, even if I can't be a husband. That's a significant step, Mr. Jenkins. May I ask what prompted this decision? Daniel looked around his small apartment, at the photos of his children taped to the wall, at the construction boots by the door, at the life he was building from the ground up. I realized that my children are watching me. Not just during our visits, but in how I handle losing everything, in whether I become bitter or better, in whether I fight to be worthy of their love or just accept that I don't deserve it. And what have you decided? That I don't deserve it yet. But maybe I can earn it. 2 days later, Daniel stood outside Lincoln Elementary School at 3:15 p.m., wearing his work clothes and holding a small bouquet of flowers from the bodega down the street. He wasn't supposed to be there. Court orders restricted him to supervised visits. But some risks were worth taking. When Christian emerged from the building, his face lit up with genuine surprise. Daddy, what are you doing here? I came to walk you home, if that's okay. I wanted to see where you go to school, meet your teachers, be part of your regular life instead of just those 2 hours on Saturdays. Christian glanced around nervously. But Mama said. I know what Mama said. And she's right to be careful. But I'm hoping she might be willing to let me try being a real daddy again, not just a weekend visitor. They walked slowly toward the small house Simone had rented in Park Slope, Christian chattering about his day, his friends, his upcoming school play. Daniel absorbed every detail, filing away information about his son's life that he'd missed while building an empire that meant nothing. When they reached the front steps, Simone was waiting on the porch. Her face was unreadable, but she wasn't calling the police or ordering him to leave. The school called, she said quietly. They said a man claiming to be Christian's father picked him up. I told them that was impossible because Christian's father only shows up for court-mandated visits. Daniel climbed the steps slowly, stopping 3 feet away from the woman he'd lost. I brought you these. He held out the bodega flowers. cheap daisies and carnations that probably cost less than the sales tax on bouquets he used to buy. Daniel, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm asking for the chance to prove that the man who's been living in Queens for 3 months is different from the man who lived in Manhattan for 6 years. Simone took the flowers, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. What's different? Everything. Daniel's voice was steady, certain in a way it hadn't been since before his father died. I remember who I was before I got scared. I remember what my father taught me about building something that lasts. And I remember why I fell in love with a brilliant woman who deserved better than a coward who was ashamed of her. Words are easy, Daniel. Then let me show you with actions. Let me prove that the man who told the truth at that wedding is the same man who wants to walk his children to school every morning and read them bedtime stories every night. Simone studied his face for a long moment, searching for the boy she'd fallen in love with underneath the man who'd betrayed her. One dinner, she said finally. This Saturday. You can cook for the children and me. In my kitchen, where we used to be a family. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was possibility, fragile and precious as new growth after a forest fire. Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice to stay steady. Thank you. As he walked away, Christian called out from the porch. Daddy, don't forget to wear your work clothes. Mama says they make you look like Grandpa Tony. For the first time in 6 years, Daniel Jenkins smiled without shame, fear, or calculation. He looked like his father. He was becoming the man he was always meant to be. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. 6 months later, Daniel stood in Simone's kitchen wearing his work clothes and an apron that read World's Okayest Dad. A gift from Luna that had made him laugh and cry simultaneously. The smell of his father's famous marinara sauce filled the air, a recipe he'd learned during those painful early visits when cooking together was safer than talking about feelings. Daddy, the sauce smells like Grandpa Tony's house, Christian announced, perched on a stool beside the stove. At 8 now, he'd appointed himself sous chef and took his responsibilities seriously. That's because it's his recipe, buddy. He taught me when I was your age. Daniel stirred carefully, remembering his father's patient hands guiding his small ones around the wooden spoon. The dinner invitation had become a weekly tradition, though Daniel never took it for granted. Each Saturday, Simone evaluated whether he'd earned another chance. Some weeks, when work stress made him short-tempered or old insecurities crept back in, she'd politely suggest he needed more time to work on himself. But more often now, she'd text on Wednesday. Saturday still good? The kids are asking. Tonight felt different, though. Electric with possibility and fraught with danger in equal measure. This morning, Thomas Wilson had called with news that could change everything, or destroy the fragile progress Daniel had built with his family. The Bronx housing project had exceeded every expectation. What started as affordable units for working families had become a model for sustainable community development. Daniel's hands-on approach, combined with his business acumen and genuine respect for the residents' needs, had created something unprecedented in urban planning. The success had attracted attention from major developers, city planners, and federal housing authorities. Thomas had fielded 3 acquisition offers in the past month, each one worth enough to restore Daniel's fortune, and then some. There's just one catch, Thomas had said that morning. The buyers want you to relocate to oversee similar projects. Chicago, Miami, San Francisco. Major contracts that would make you wealthy again almost overnight. Daniel had stared out the window of his Queens apartment, watching Mrs. Gonzalez hang laundry on her fire escape while her granddaughter practiced violin in the courtyard below. 6 months ago, he would have seen opportunity. Now he saw what he'd be leaving behind. I need to think about it, he'd told Thomas. Of course. But Daniel, these opportunities won't wait long. The construction industry has a short memory for scandal, but an even shorter attention span for success. Now, as Luna set the table with the mismatched plates and glasses that made Simone's house feel like home, Daniel wrestled with the decision that could define his future. Mama, can we show Daddy the surprise after dinner? Luna asked, her 6-year-old face bright with excitement. Simone appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing a simple blue dress that made her look like the college student he'd fallen in love with. What surprise? The one you've been working on in your office, Christian said with the exasperation of an older brother dealing with a sister who couldn't keep secrets. Daniel caught Simone's eye, raising an eyebrow in question. She blushed slightly, the first time he'd seen her genuinely flustered in months. It's nothing major, just some paperwork. They ate dinner together around the small table that had once felt like a symbol of everything Daniel was missing in his corporate life. Now it felt like the center of his universe, messy and loud and perfect in ways that country club elegance could never match. Christian dominated conversation with stories about his soccer team, while Luna provided running commentary on her second-grade teacher's various injustices. Simone listened with the attention she'd always given their children, but Daniel caught her glancing at him throughout the meal, as if evaluating something beyond his marinara sauce. After the dishes were cleared and the children had been bribed with ice cream to play in the living room, Simone led Daniel to her home office. The space was a testament to her success. Awards from community organizations lined the walls, project photos showed transformed neighborhoods, and her desk was covered with contracts and proposals that proved Washington Development Strategies was thriving. But what caught Daniel's attention was the legal document open on her computer screen. "Simone, is that?" "Divorce papers," she said quietly. "The final version." Daniel's chest tightened. 6 months of progress, of slowly rebuilding trust, of becoming the father and man his family deserved. Had it all been leading to this moment of legal separation? "I see." His voice came out steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. "Do you?" Simone turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. "Because I've been working on these for 3 weeks, and I can't bring myself to file them." Hope flickered like a candle in a storm. "Why not?" "Because the man I fell in love with has been showing up every Saturday for 6 months. Because my children light up when they hear your work boots on the front steps. Because you've kept every promise you've made, no matter how small." She moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume. The same scent she'd worn on their first date when he was brave enough to love her openly. "Because when I watch you teach Christian how to tie his shoes or help Luna with her homework, I see the father I always knew you could be. And when I watch you covered in construction dust, talking about building homes for families who need them, I see the man your father raised you to be." Daniel's hands trembled as he reached for her, stopping just short of touching her face. "Simone, but I also need to know that you're choosing this life because you want it, not because you've lost everything else." Her voice was steady but vulnerable. "I need to know that if someone offered you your old life back, the penthouse, the power, the prestige, you'd still choose us." The words hit like a physical blow because they were so perfectly timed. Daniel stared at the woman who'd always been able to see straight through to his heart, even when he was trying to hide from himself. "How did you know?" "Thomas Wilson called me this afternoon. He wanted to discuss a partnership between his foundation and my consulting firm." Simone's smile was sad and knowing. "He also mentioned that some very wealthy people are trying to steal my ex-husband for projects that would make him rich again." Daniel sank into the chair beside her desk, running his hands through his hair. "He offered me everything I thought I wanted 6 months ago. Multiple cities, unlimited budgets, the chance to build an empire again. And all I could think about was who would walk Christian to school if I was in Chicago, who would help Luna practice her violin if I was in Miami, who would have Saturday dinners with the most beautiful woman in Brooklyn if I was busy being important in San Francisco." Simone's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd think about it. But I've been thinking for 8 hours, and the answer keeps coming back the same." Daniel stood, moving to the window that overlooked the small backyard where his children's toys were scattered across the grass. "I spent 6 years building something that looked impressive from the outside but was empty inside. Now I'm building something that matters. Homes for families, relationships with my children, trust with the woman I love more than my own life." He turned back to face her, his voice steady with certainty. "I don't want to be rich again, Simone. I want to be worthy of this life we're building together. Even if it means giving up the chance to have everything you lost. I didn't lose everything. I threw it away because I was too scared to fight for what mattered. But if you'll let me, if you'll trust me one more time, I want to fight for us. Not for show, not because I'm desperate, but because a life with you and Christian and Luna is the only success that means anything." Simone was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if memorizing it. Then she reached for her computer and, with deliberate precision, deleted the divorce papers. "I have a proposal for you," she said, her voice taking on the businesslike tone he'd heard her use with clients. "Washington Development Strategies is expanding. We're taking on urban renewal projects in 3 boroughs, and we need a construction partner who understands both the technical work and the community impact." Daniel's heart stopped. "Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. Equal shares, shared decisions, your name on the door beside mine." She paused, her professional mask slipping to reveal the woman beneath. "I'm also offering you the chance to come home if you want to." "Home? Daddy?" Luna's voice echoed from the living room. "Mama, come see what we built." They found their children in the center of the living room, surrounded by every pillow, blanket, and couch cushion in the house. They'd constructed an elaborate fort with multiple rooms, carefully labeled entrances, and a sign hung over the main doorway that read, "The Jenkins Family Castle," in Luna's careful 6-year-old handwriting. "It has a room for everyone," Christian explained proudly. "Mama's office where she can help people, Daddy's workshop where he can build things, my room for soccer trophies, and Luna's room for her art. And look," Luna pointed to the center chamber, where she'd arranged 4 pillows in a circle around a battery-powered lantern. "A place where we can all eat dinner together every night, not just Saturdays." Daniel dropped to his knees beside the fort, overwhelmed by his children's vision of family. Imperfect, improvised, built from whatever materials were available, but solid enough to shelter everyone inside. "It's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "So does this mean you'll live here again?" Christian asked, his 8-year-old directness cutting through all adult complications. Daniel looked at Simone, seeking permission for the answer his heart already knew. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "If Mama says it's okay, then yes. Daddy's coming home." The celebration that followed involved enough shouting, hugging, and happy tears to wake the entire neighborhood. But as Daniel held his family in the ridiculous blanket fort his children had built, he realized this was what real wealth looked like. Not the approval of strangers or the accumulation of possessions, but the trust of people who knew you completely and chose to love you anyway. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the fort had been reluctantly dismantled, Daniel sat on the front steps with Simone, watching the neighborhood settle into evening quiet. "I called Thomas back," he said quietly. "Told him I was interested in a different kind of partnership. Local projects, community-focused development, work that lets me be home for dinner every night. And," he said, "the Wilson Foundation has been looking for exactly that kind of approach. Something authentic instead of just profitable." Daniel smiled, remembering the conversation. Apparently, watching a man choose his family over his fortune left quite an impression. Simone leaned against his shoulder, solid and warm and real. "So what happens now? Now we build something together. Not just a business, but a life. The kind of life where our children never have to wonder if their father is proud of them, where the woman I love never has to compete with my ambition for my attention. And if it gets difficult? If the old temptations come back?" Daniel thought about the country club ballroom where his world had collapsed, about the moment his children had called him daddy in front of people who didn't think they deserved to exist. He thought about the shame that had poisoned 6 years of marriage and the courage it had taken to choose truth over comfort. "Then I'll remember what it felt like to lose you. And I'll remember that the only empire worth building is the one that includes everyone you love." Above them, the bedroom window glowed softly where Christian and Luna slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that their family was whole again. It had taken the destruction of everything Daniel thought. He wanted to find everything he actually needed. But sometimes the most beautiful structures could only be built on the ruins of what came before. 2 years later, Daniel stood in the community center that had once been an abandoned warehouse in the South Bronx, watching his daughter practice violin with 12 other children from the neighborhood. The Washington Jenkins Community Development Project had transformed 6 blocks of neglected housing into thriving homes, and the cultural center was Luna's idea, a 7-year-old solution to the problem of kids having nowhere safe to play after school. "Daddy, did you hear my solo?" Luna bounced over to him after practice, her violin case nearly as big as she was. "Every note, princess. You sounded like an angel." Daniel knelt to help her pack up her instrument, marveling at how much she'd grown in confidence along with skill. Mrs. Rodriguez says I might be ready for the City Youth Orchestra auditions next year. Luna's eyes shone with excitement. Will you come with me if I make it? Try and stop me. Daniel lifted her into his arms, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. 2 years ago, the idea of sitting in an auditorium full of strangers while his daughter performed would have terrified him. Not because he was ashamed, but because he'd been so disconnected from her daily life that he wouldn't have known she played violin. Now, his phone was full of videos of her practicing, photos of her school concerts, recordings of her explaining complex musical concepts with 7-year-old authority. He was building a library of memories to replace the years he'd missed while chasing other people's approval. Christian appeared from the basketball court behind the center, sweaty and grinning after practice with the community league team Daniel helped coach. At 9, he was tall for his age and showed signs of inherited athletic ability, but more importantly, he developed the kind of quiet leadership that made other kids gravitate toward him. Dad, can Tommy and Miguel come for dinner tomorrow? Christian asked, using the casual dad that had replaced the formal daddy as he'd grown older. Mom said she'd teach us how to make her famous empanadas if it's okay with you. Of course, buddy. But you know the rule. Everyone helps with cleanup, Christian finished with good-natured eye-rolling. I already told them. Miguel says his grandmother makes empanadas too, so it's going to be like a cooking competition. Daniel ruffled his son's hair, noting the easy way Christian included friends from different backgrounds, different cultures, different economic circumstances. The boy was growing up in a neighborhood where diversity was strength rather than division. Exactly the kind of community Daniel and Simone had envisioned when they'd started their partnership. Their drive home took them through 3 neighborhoods they'd helped transform. What had started as the Bronx Housing Project had grown into a citywide initiative, with Washington Jenkins Development becoming the go-to firm for projects that prioritize community input over developer profits. The brownstone they'd bought in Park Slope was nothing like Daniel's former penthouse. Smaller, older, requiring constant maintenance that Daniel had learned to handle himself. But it was filled with the kind of warmth that money couldn't buy. Children's artwork covering the refrigerator, family photos documenting every milestone, the comfortable chaos of a house where people actually lived rather than simply resided. Simone was in the kitchen when they arrived, her laptop open on the counter while she stirred something that smelled like heaven. She'd learned to balance running her expanding company with being present for their family, a skill Daniel was still mastering but improving at daily. How was practice? She asked, accepting hugs from both children before they thundered upstairs to start homework. Luna's getting ready for youth orchestra auditions, and Christian wants to host the United Nations of Empanada making tomorrow night. Daniel moved behind his wife, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. How was your day? Productive. The mayor's office approved our proposal for the Queens waterfront project. 40 units of affordable housing, plus retail space for local businesses. Simone leaned back against his chest, solid and warm and real. And Thomas called. The Wilson Foundation wants to expand our partnership to 3 more cities. Daniel felt the familiar flutter of opportunity, but it was tempered now by questions that hadn't occurred to him in his former life. How much travel would that require? What's the timeline? Can we structure it so family dinner stays sacred? Simone turned in his arms, studying his face with the careful attention she'd always paid to details. You've really changed, haven't you? Every day I choose to change. Every day I choose this life over the alternative. Daniel touched her face gently, marveling that she'd given him the chance to earn back her trust. Why do you ask? Because Harrison Wells called this afternoon. Daniel's blood chilled. His former board member had disappeared after the bankruptcy, presumably to rebuild his own reputation, somewhere Daniel's scandal couldn't touch him. What did he want? To offer you a position. Senior Vice President of Development with Morrison International. Massive salary, unlimited budget, projects in Europe and Asia. Simone's voice was carefully neutral. He said they'd looked past the unfortunate incident at the Wilson wedding and were impressed with your recent work. The old Daniel would have felt vindicated. Proof that his professional reputation could be rehabilitated, that his skills were still valued in the marketplace that had once defined his worth. The new Daniel felt something closer to pity for the man he used to be. I hope you told him I was flattered but unavailable. I told him he'd have to discuss it with my business partner directly. Simone's smile was radiant. I also told him that my partner was very particular about working only with organizations that valued integrity over profit margins. Daniel laughed, spinning her around the kitchen until she shrieked with laughter. Mrs. Washington Jenkins, you are a formidable negotiator. Mrs. Jenkins, she corrected, showing him the simple gold band she'd started wearing again 6 months ago. I had my name legally changed last week. Thought it was time to make our partnership official in every way that matters. Before Daniel could respond, Christian's voice echoed from upstairs. Mom! Dad! Come see what Luna built in our room. They found their children in Christian's bedroom, where Luna had constructed an elaborate fort using the engineering principles Daniel had been teaching her during their Saturday morning building projects. But this wasn't the chaotic blanket castle of 2 years ago. This was a precisely designed structure with load-bearing walls, proper ventilation, and a sign that read Jenkins Family Headquarters, all welcome. It's our family business headquarters, Luna announced proudly. Christian can plan soccer strategies here, I can practice violin, Mom can work on her computer, and Dad can draw building plans. And look, Christian pointed to the center of the fort, where 4 sleeping bags were arranged around a battery-powered lantern. If we ever need to have really important family meetings, we can camp in here together. Daniel crawled into the fort, followed by Simone and both children, all 4 of them squeezed into a space designed for 2. It was cramped and ridiculous and absolutely perfect. So what's our first official family business meeting about? Simone asked, settling Luna on her lap while Christian leaned against Daniel's shoulder. About how we're the best family in the whole world, Luna declared with 6-year-old authority. And about how Daddy never gets sad anymore when people take pictures of us. It was true. Last month, a society photographer had snapped photos of them at a community festival. Daniel in work clothes, Simone laughing at something Christian had said, both children sticky with cotton candy and completely unself-conscious. The pictures had run in 3 local papers with captions celebrating their community development work. Daniel had framed them all. I never get sad about pictures because I'm proud of our family, Daniel said, meaning it completely. I'm proud of Mom's brilliant business ideas, proud of Christian's kindness to his teammates, proud of Luna's musical talent, and proud that we've built something beautiful together. Even when other people don't understand? Christian asked, still occasionally needing reassurance that his father's love was unconditional. Especially then. The best things in life are worth defending, even when other people can't see their value. Daniel pulled his son closer, remembering the scared boy who'd once wondered if his father was ashamed of him. Do you know what I've learned in the past 2 years? What? Both children asked in unison. That success isn't about how much money you make or how many important people know your name. Success is about building something that makes the world a little bit better and sharing it with people you love. And about Saturday morning pancakes, Luna added seriously. Those are very important for success. Absolutely crucial, Daniel agreed, making her giggle. As they sat in their ridiculous blanket fort, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of a real family life, Daniel thought about the journey that had brought them here. The ballroom humiliation that had felt like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of the only life worth living. He'd lost an empire built on lies and gained a kingdom built on truth. He'd traded the approval of strangers for the love of his family. He'd given up the illusion of importance for the reality of purpose. Later, after the children were asleep and the fort had been carefully preserved for tomorrow's adventures, Daniel and Simone sat on their front porch, watching the neighborhood settle into evening quiet. Any regrets? Simone asked, her hand warm in his. Daniel considered the question seriously. 2 years ago, he'd owned a penthouse worth millions, commanded respect from Manhattan's elite, and believed he was living the American dream. Tonight, he owned a modest brownstone with a leaky roof, spent his days working construction, and measured his wealth in soccer games attended and violin recitals applauded. Only one, he said finally. Simone tensed slightly. What's that? That it took me so long to realize that the life I was hiding was the life worth living. Above them, the bedroom windows glowed softly where their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that their family was built on a foundation strong enough to weather any storm. It wasn't the life Daniel had planned when he'd graduated from Harvard with dreams of corporate conquest. It was infinitely better. Hey, beautiful souls, wasn't that a journey that just grabbed your heart and refused to let go? Daniel's story reminds us that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between fitting in and staying true to your values? Have you witnessed someone find the courage to live authentically even when it cost them everything they thought they wanted? Drop your stories in the comments below because your experiences inspire the content I create. And trust me, reading your insights always moves me deeply. If this story touched your heart or made you think about what real success looks like, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I share powerful stories like this every week that will challenge you, inspire you, and remind you that love, authentic, unconditional love, is always worth fighting for. Until next time, remember, the courage to live truthfully isn't just about being honest with others. It's about being honest with yourself about what makes life worth living.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed it, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and more intriguing than you can ever imagine.